Mr. States General, how important was this round of census, given that the country is also going through the national planning phase? We're planning for 2030. And how did you incorporate these figures into that bigger picture?
For modern states modern states are technocratic states. They are scientific states. They rely on information to make decisions. And the prospect of, and they plan, and that prospect of a national plan and the National Planning Commission precipitated the demand for these numbers, particularly the third point, which is the census of 2011. I think it will provide the basis for moving forward, for monitoring the national plan, for looking at what needs to be tweaked in order to achieve the objectives of the national plan in the next 17 to 18 years.
A lot of figures that we're going to be going through, but give us a broader highlights of Census 2011.
Well, a number of things. People have experiences, and a lot of things that we have experienced, the census generally confirms. But the important thing that it quantifies them, and it puts a geographic specificity to these instances. For instance, we are able to report on municipalities, we are able to report at villages, and we are able to report at those levels where action and meaningful action can be made. Having said that, but let's talk about the big figure, which is 51.8 million. South Africa has grown now by about 7 million between 2001 and 2011. By province, KwaZulu-Natal is no longer the biggest province. It is 10.3 million, and Gauteng is 12.3 million. These provinces were almost, Gauteng was slightly smaller than KwaZulu-Natal in 2001, and now it is 2 million. It has 2 million more residents in Gauteng than there in KwaZulu-Natal with 12.2 million. This implies that the streams of migration across movement of people in South Africa is very, very intense, and it has been towards the northern parts of the country. That is Mpumalanga, Northwest, and Gauteng. Even Limpopo, people migrate from Limpopo into Gauteng as well. So that belt of Northwest along N4 has had a surge in population forward. It's not only Gauteng, but it's in Mpumalanga and Northwest. While KwaZulu-Natal has not grown as fast, Eastern Cape, Free State, and Northern Cape have not grown as fast. So there has been movement. Western Cape has grown quite dramatically with migration from Eastern Cape into the Western Cape itself. So there have been enormous population shifts across provinces.
Whilst you're giving a broader picture, I just want to zoom in into this movement of the people saying that KZN no longer the biggest province. Now Gauteng has taken over. Number one, what does this mean economically and in terms of the distribution of budgets? And also in terms of if these provinces are not growing, what does that mean to their economy?
Well, I only probably provide the numbers, but not explain what things mean for what. But with the numbers of people that are coming into Gauteng, you will see that between 2001 and 2011 censuses, certain areas, certain municipalities were performing much better than probably they are performing now. Although they are still performing quite high, the numbers of people as they come into those municipalities, you see a reduction in the service level that used to be there, just because of the pouring of people, migration into these areas. That's one. That is pressure on services, particularly in Gauteng and Western Cape, and particularly the metropolitan areas. And then, of course, in the Rustenburg area, the issues around, if you look at the beginning Transkei, Fikile in the north, next to Rustenburg, all those areas are feeling the pressure of people coming in. And then, of course, people around Marikana, all those areas are feeling service delivery pressures because of immigration.
Migration.
Yes.
Right. I see also the issue of the economy here is top on the minds of many South Africans right now. What did the Census 2011 say about our economy? Were there any positive movements over the past years?
Well, in terms of money, in terms of salaries, the the rise in incomes has beaten inflation in South Africa. I mean, nominally there's been an increase of 113% over the last 10 years, which means on average it was about 11%, and the average inflation rate has been around 6, tipping onto 7 a little bit, and then retreating back. Inflation over the last 10 years will be about 76% against a rise in incomes of 113%. There's a net gain in real terms of about 30%. So that implies that living standards will have improved. But then what you also see is income disparities continuing to sustain. For instance, whites get 365,000 per annum, blacks 60,000. That's a huge 6 times more than blacks and colors. Indians and whites, on the other hand, have a better share of the income. But also the black income share has also risen. So all ships were lifted by the rising tide. But others have risen much faster than some.
There you're talking about South Africa's household income.
Yes, indeed.
All right. But also there is this glaring disparity, of course, that I think everyone wants to talk about. Loads and loads of SMSs here showing that white people still take home 6 times more money on average than black people. Talk us through that.
Well, I mean, if you look at how many white people had Standard 3 as far back as 1930, you see that 90% of whites already had grade 3 then, whereas less than 30% of blacks had grade 3. In 1948, when the apartheid policy was introduced, you see a differential access to education and the intensity of education at that time. All those effects go very, very deep and goes several years back. The census tells us that story from about 1930. We have run the census in 2011, but it tells us a story of what happened from 1930 up to now. So the levels of education,
of course,
the intensity of education is the prime mover of the disparities that South Africa have had. And you see that over time there was a retardation in the education, particularly of coloreds and blacks. Indians took a different trajectory and almost rapidly moved towards where whites were. I mean, if you look at those who have grade 10, it was way back as 1930. 50% of whites already had grade 10 against almost less than 10% amongst coloreds and blacks. And as the time progressed, these differences even deepened. I mean, these differences meant that the disparities are reproduced in society.
What does Census 2011 tell us about, for instance, people who go on then to complete their degrees, and what kind of skill is coming out there? Are we doing science and technology? Are we doing a lot of accounting?
Yes, indeed. I mean, as South Africans, because I mean, this thing has a very deep policy decisions that were taken in 1953 by the then Minister of Education, Bantu Education, Hendrik Verwoerd, and then later Prime Minister in 1961, saying that what is the use of teaching a Bantu child mathematics when it doesn't have use for it? So 60 years ago, this was what happened. And for generations to come, South Africa is suffering because we don't have mathematics teachers, and this is the result. The census is a reflection of decisions taken 60 years ago.
What does the census tell us about those who are self-employed, and how many jobs did they create?
Well, it's difficult to talk about job creation amongst particularly the self-employed if you have to look at data from 2001 to 2011. The point is that when we measured in 2001, we didn't go to the detail we went to in 2011. So there are no answers there.
Okay.
For these kinds of questions, you really have to go to the quarterly labor force survey, which runs every quarter over a period of 7 years, and that gives you a more tangible answer around what has happened in that area.
Census puts the country's average age at 25. Talk us through that.
Yes, it means that we are, we were at an average of 22 in 1996, and then we moved to 23 in 2001. Now we are about 25. So we are actually growing. That is the average age is a growing age. So we might be a growing population. But we are still a very young population with more than 60% of the population below the age of 30.
How do we compare to the developed countries and
The developed countries? I mean, the beauty of South Africa's demography, albeit created through a political ploy. You see the demography of the developed world and the demography of developing underdeveloped world. When you look at whites and you look at blacks, you see it's there in your face. When you look at go through the pyramids by race. What we look at, the whites have very, very fewer people at the ages 0 to 4, and at younger ages, and they have a bulge in the middle. In the ages 30 to 40, they have a very, very big bulge, 30 to 50. Indians also follow almost the similar patterns, but coloreds and blacks have a very flat base, with blacks having a very, very flat base of people that are under 15.
About 2.2 million were born outside South Africa, according to 2011 census. Talk us through that.
Yes, indeed. According to census 2011, 2.2 million people were, in the counted were born outside South Africa. So that you could proxy for foreign nationals. And then when you look at citizenship, obviously you can iron out how many are citizens and how many are not citizens. The data is quite credible. We also have nationalities by nationality. Zimbabweans, Nigerians, Basotho from Lesotho, the Botswana, and so on. So we have this breakdown, and people from the UK, Eastern Europe, and so on. We've got all that data broken down by different countries of origin.